It's wonderful to see each one of you. On behalf of the association, I extend an especially warm and sincere welcome to the distinguished guests who have accepted the invitation of members of the association and are with us tonight. We hope that you can stay for the entire conference. At this time, I'd like to read to you the greetings from the mayor of the city of Irvine. This is addressed to the Spiritual Assembly of the Baha'is of Irvine and to the International Conference. Dear participants, on behalf of the city of Irvine, I would like to personally commend your efforts through the International Conference on the Equality of Women and Men. Men and women, together and equally, share the responsibilities of establishing peace throughout the world. Our world is getting smaller every day. With modern technology, far reaches of the globe and the heavens are at our fingertips. Women and men in all walks of life have made contributions in providing the world with values to meet the ever-increasing challenges to the well-being and peace of mankind. It is with pleasure that I join with the members of the Baha'i faith in Irvine in focusing on the equality of women and men in this way. Sincerely, Larry Agran, Mayor. The title and subject, as you just heard, of this year's conference is Full Partnership in International Conference of the Equality of Women and Men. This subject is very dear to the hearts of many women and men in this room tonight. We have a genuine desire to better know and understand its many facets because we know its importance. My understanding of the sacred text of the Baha'i faith regarding this equality is this: equality of women and men already exists. Equality of women and men already exists because Baha'u'llah decreed that they are equal. However, the realization and establishment of this equality in our evolving social order remains to be achieved. It must be encouraged and promoted by men, and it must be won by women. Why is it so important? It's not for the satisfaction of women, nor is it simply to prove equality. It isn't simply to get paid as much for doing a job as a man would get paid, or to raise the value in society of the work of mothers in the home with small children so they will be happy to be there. These are good things, and hopefully we will achieve them. But the real purpose of achieving the recognition and establishment of equality is that humankind cannot achieve its full potential without it, a potential toward which all of humanity has been evolving since its beginning. Nor can peace, which no doubt will precede the full development of humankind's potential, be achieved without the recognition and establishment of equality. This conference has been dedicated to examination of just what the equality of women and men means and to exploring the means by which we can achieve it. The conference will be divided into 4 main topics of study: full partnership, universals of equality, women and equality, and men and equality. The Association for Bahá'í Studies has invited outstanding scholars, professionals, and persons of achievement to present ideas and to lead discussions. We hope that each of you will join in the discussions and that together we will come to a deeper understanding. At this point, it is my profound pleasure to introduce to you, although she really needs no introduction, a woman who in many ways serves as a role model for Baha'i women because she has stepped forward into a field where women are greatly needed but have been underrepresented, where she has achieved excellence and won well-deserved recognition, and in doing this she has contributed to the well-being and advancement of society. In addition to a professional career, She has long served on and is now, at this time, the chairperson of the National Spiritual Assembly of the Baha'is of the United States. She is truly an example of one of the ways the handmaidens of God may serve Him. This marvelous person I'm speaking of course, who will co-chair this conference, is the Honorable Judge Dorothy Nelson. Please welcome.
Thank you. What a joy it is to add my welcome to all of you to this 14th annual conference. And the miracle of all of this is to co-chair with Jackie Delahunt. When I was a little girl, I used to, when we would travel to the Native American reservations, was always enthralled with the Native Americans. In fact, I have a little rug that I saved from the time I think I was about 9 years old when we first visited the Indian reservations. And little did I think that one day I would be privileged to co-chair a conference on the equality of men and women with a woman from the Lakota Reservation in South Dakota, whose wisdom, whose knowledge, whose love, whose warmth are unsurpassed in my experience. And so I would just like to say, Jackie, this is going to be a fun weekend to be here together. The Planning Committee deserves a great deal of credit, for they have brought together an array of talent unmatched in my experience in a conference of this kind. And I know that those of us who were here today in some of the workshops got just a glimpse of the exciting things that are before us. But before we start, I would just like to add to what Jackie said about basic Baha'i beliefs in the equality of men and women. Fundamental to the Baha'i view is the concept of the oneness and wholeness of the human race, of which the equality of men and women is a vital and clearly stated spiritual as well as a social principle. Now, the word partnership for this weekend is very important. And as we will hear from Rian Iser tomorrow, I hope that all of you, and I think her book is in the bookstore, called The Chalice and the Blade, where she has done an anthropological study showing that we are now ready to move from the dominator model to the partnership model. And it is the partnership model, as opposed to the dominator model, that we should seek in every way possible as we work toward a society that is peaceful, not just in removing armaments, but that is peaceful in every aspect of society. Now, this is the balanced approach which we find in the Baha'i writings, whereas most of you know, we are told that men and women are like the two wings of a bird. The one is male and the other is female. Unless they are both strong and compelled by a common force, the bird cannot fly heavenwards. But if you note, you cannot take the right wing of a bird and put it in the left socket. It doesn't fit. And so we know in the Baha'i faith that while men and women have many capacities in common, they have certain separate and distinct functions, such as motherhood, which do not interfere with equality, but just emphasize the need for all of the special attributes of both sexes if we are to achieve a truly peaceful society. Now, we are told in the Baha'i writings, without achieving this balance, the peace of the world, as Jackie said, is not possible. The dominator model, where man has dominated over woman by reason of more forceful and aggressive qualities of body and mind, has already begun to shift. Force is losing its weight, and mental alertness, intuition, and the spiritual qualities of love and service in which woman is strong are beginning to gain ascendancy. Thus, the new age, we believe, will be more permeated with feminine ideals, an age in which the masculine and feminine elements of civilization will be more evenly balanced. In the Baha'i writings it says that war will cease when women enter confidently and capably the great arena of law and nonpartisan politics. Women, being the bearers of the children, will refuse to give up their children upon the field of battle. These complementary qualities must be brought to the council tables. How often do you see a peace conference where you have women at the council table? How often do you see environmental conferences or conferences on health where women play a particular part in what we call as Baha'is the art of consultation? This afternoon we talked a great deal about it, and I mentioned that when I was in India just a few years ago, after the Bhopal incident, and was asked after some San Francisco lawyer had said he was there to collect clients for money, and they said, Judge Nelson, how would you solve the Bhopal problem? And I said I would do what the European Court on Human Rights did. I would have an international fact-finding commission, then I would follow this with mediation, and then international arbitration if necessary, all which could take place within the scope of a year or so. Well, this got the attention of all the newspapers in China, or many of them. 722 of the 3,500 papers said mediation for Bhopal, says U.S. judge. But then they asked me to describe what I meant by mediation, and I responded that what I meant by mediation was the Baha'i concept of consultation, which is where everyone participates, giving ideas to the whole, and the end result ends up with something that is much greater than all the individual input. But I said it was essential that men and women participate in such consultations if the greatest results were to be achieved. After that, I had many requests to go all over India speaking about the equality of men and women, and it's that principle alone that I think it accounts for almost 1 million Baha'is in India today and 100,000 new Indian Baha'is in the past 3 months. The concept that at last women shall participate in all aspects of life. Now, to do this, of course, in order for women to participate at the council tables of peace and so forth, there's a great stress in the Baha'i writings on education. And indeed, the stress is so great that if you're in a society where you have to choose between educating the boy and the girl, you educate the girl. Why? Because the woman is the first teacher of the child. And if the mother is not educated, then her offspring, be they male or female, will not be truly educated. We also need to have greater education, according to the Baha'i writings, in the area of family life. We believe that the family is the central unit of society. The family is the nation in miniature. You simply enlarge the circle of the household, you have the nation. If you enlarge the circle of the nation, you have the world. So we believe that equality, unity, and cooperation must be taught first in the family. The Baha'i writings call for a fundamental restructuring of society based on principles of unity and justice. Baha'u'llah, the founder of the Baha'i faith, said, "The best beloved of all things in my sight is justice." And so, if we achieve justice in the home, the workplace, and in society, this will in turn lead to unity. And since the concept of the equality of men and women is spiritually based, men must not only abandon any vestige of prejudice, but must work actively to encourage and foster the development of women, we believe. It was funny when my husband and I first went to a Baha'i fireside to learn about the Baha'i faith. It was in Westwood Village out near UCLA, and someone was relating the principles of the Baha'i faith and said, and one of the principles is the equality of men and women. And my husband, the other good judge, said, "Oh boy, at last, equality." But I don't think that that's quite what they had in mind. At any rate, the Baha'i faith exhorts us all to avoid contention and conflict with one another as we discuss these issues. But they also say that through the spark of conflicting opinions, or through the spark of conflicting opinions will come the spark of truth, and truth will emerge. And avoiding contention on these issues does not mean that we should avoid the examination of the many issues, spiritual, historical, psychological, economic, and social, on which the education of us all depends. The Baha'is regard their worldwide community as a workshop where men and women from diverse backgrounds attempt to put this concept of the equality of men and women together with the other Baha'i teachings into practice. We are thrilled to have you all join us in this endeavor. It is my pleasure now to introduce our keynote speaker of the evening. And it's very hard for me to know where to begin, because I knew him when he was not quite this small, maybe a little larger, when my little daughter used to follow him around at Baha'i summer schools, madly in love with him, peeking around trees saying, "There he goes," and "There he goes." And he wore blue suede shoes to one of our dances, and she practically fainted when she saw him walk in the room. So I have been living with a family that's held him up in high esteem for many, many, many years. In his professional life, after his doctorate in education, he achieved tremendous success in the business world, working as a business consultant for Parkinson & Associates and then becoming vice president of Air Atlanta. And all of a sudden, he was elected to the National Spiritual Assembly of the Baha'is of the United States. We have no clergy in the faith. We are governed by administrative bodies of 9 people in 158 countries of the world, with our international body in Haifa, Israel. And not only was he elected to the National Spiritual Assembly of the Baha'is of the United States, he was elected as its Secretary General, which is a full-time job, helping to administer the affairs of the faith in Wilmette, Illinois. But one of the joys in thinking about our Secretary General is thinking about his grandmother and his grandfather. His grandmother, Sadie Ellis, and his grandfather, Charles. Charles used to meet me at Baha'i meetings and call me his Portia, and always sit down to discuss the legal principles of the world. But it was his grandmother, Sadie, who was really the heart of the family. Sadie Ellis became a Baha'i in 1938 and came out of a fundamentalist Christian background. It took great courage to become a Baha'i in those days. And if you looked at the family lineage and the distinction that all members of this family have displayed in serving the cause of human rights and world peace and in serving the Baha'i faith, it would be hard to find another American family to be its equal. One of my joys is serving on the National Assembly with our Secretary General, and which means that we go back to the particular house where we all stay together. He is married to a wonderful artist who fills the home with beautiful art. But the real art of this family are their three incredible children, Camille, Angela, and Miles, with whom we play ping pong on breaks at meetings of the National Spiritual Assembly. The fun of going to that happy, wonderful household I cannot describe, nor can I describe the admiration and respect that we have for our Secretary General. It is my distinct honor and privilege to introduce to you now the Secretary General of the Baha'i Faith, who will speak on full partnership, prerequisite to human progress, Mr. Robert Henderson.
Thank you. I must confess that a more gracious introduction I have never had. But you know, it is appropriate, and I must confess. Now, already I've broken Baha'i tradition, because those of you who know anything about the Baha'i faith know that confession is not a part of the behavior of Baha'is. But I will start this evening's comments with a confession. And that is that I had serious misgivings when I was called and asked to give this address. The reason is very simple. My mind was flooded with scores of names of women I knew who could appeal to you with passion and with a vision that exceeds my own. However, I believe that men must not only take a role in the quest for full partnership, but that men must become champions of the equality of men and women. And in the spirit of my grandmother's experience, of her heroism, can you imagine what it was like for a black Christian woman to become a Baha'i in 1938? Her friends thought she had lost her mind. It wasn't a laughing matter. This is a woman who was the spiritual cornerstone of the First Baptist Church of Phoenix, Arizona. And yet, all of a sudden, people found her following a prophet they couldn't pronounce. They thought that she had been captured by an evil spirit. They ostracized her. And when they asked her why she followed this prophet whom no one had ever heard of, she said, if you knew Jesus, you would know Baha'u'llah, because the spiritual reality is the same. So it is in that spirit that I conquered my own misgivings, and it is in that spirit that I address you this evening. I want to go back for just a moment to the 19th century, because we are not that far away, either in time or in spirit, from those times. In the 19th century, women were counted as livestock in many parts of the world. Here in the United States, a significant percentage of this nation's population was enslaved in chattel bondage. And yet at that very time, there was a new consciousness beginning to express itself through small voices that were barely discernible throughout the American continent. But they were speaking to a new age. They were speaking to a new set of possibilities. There was a spiritual vision of equality and full partnership beginning to emerge from some most unlikely sources. I'd like to share one of them with you this evening. John Russwurm was the first black graduate of Amherst College. He graduated in 1826. In that same year, he established a journal called Freedom's Journal, and it was dedicated to the abolition of slavery. He published an editorial in one of the early issues of Freedom's Journal from a slave woman named Matilda. Matilda no doubt learned to read and write as the playmate of her master's daughter. But had it been known or discovered that she had written an article for publication in Freedom's Journal, her skills would have resulted in severe punishment and perhaps even sale and the division of her family. But as oppressed and completely confined as her condition was, her spirit, her soul, was vibrating with a new spirit in the age. And that age is the age of light and fulfillment, the age of equality. So she wrote to Freedom's Journal and she said, "Mr. Editors, will you allow a female to offer a few remarks upon a subject that you must allow to be all important? I don't know that in any of your papers you have said sufficient upon the education of females. I hope that you are not to be classed with those who think that our mathematical knowledge should be limited to fathoming a dish kettle, and that we have acquired enough history if we know that our grandfather's father lived and died. 'Tis true, time has been when to darn a stocking and cook a pudding well was considered to be the end and aim of a woman's being. But those were the days when ignorance blinded men's eyes. The diffusion of knowledge has destroyed those degraded opinions, and men of the present age allow that we have minds that are capable and deserving of culture. There are great difficulties in the way of our advancement, but that should only stir us to greater efforts. We possess not the advantages of those of our sex whose skins are not colored like our own, but we can improve what little we have and make our one talent produce twofold. The influence that we have over the male sex demands that our minds should be instructed and improved with the principles of education and religion, in order that this influence should be properly directed. Ignorant ourselves, how can we be expected to form the minds of our youth and conduct them in the paths of knowledge? There is a great responsibility resting somewhere, and it is time for us to be up and doing. I would address myself to all mothers and say to them that while it is necessary to possess a knowledge of cookery and the various mysteries of pudding making, something more is requisite. It is their bounden duty to store their daughters' minds with useful learning. They should be made to devote their leisure time to reading books, whence they could derive valuable information which could never be taken from them. I will not longer trespass on your time and patience. I merely throw out these hints in order that some more able pen will take up the subject. It is signed Matilda. It was written in 1827. Not very long after that, Baha'u'llah, the prophet founder of the Baha'i faith, established the principle of equality of men and women as, for the first time in religious history, as one of the fundamental prerequisites to all social and political progress, to the achievement of human happiness and wholeness, to the establishment of universal harmony, to the achievement of peace, to the consolidation and the establishment of one universal family. For the first time in religious history, a man claiming to be a messenger of God, a manifestation of God, said that this age in which we live represents the consummation of human evolution. This is the time of fulfillment. He said that it was preordained at the time of existence, of creation, that the equality of men and women would be. However, this is the time of fulfillment, and it is owing to the righteousness, the strength, the forbearance, the patience, the enormous contributions that women had made over the centuries, the preceding centuries. But now, in order to accomplish the goal of peace, in order to achieve the ultimate aim of the dispensation of Baha'u'llah, which is the achievement of one universal family, full partnership, the equality of men and women is an essential prerequisite. The Baha'i writings say clearly, until the reality of equality between man and woman is fully established and attained, the highest social development of mankind is not possible. They further state, and let it be known once more, that until man and woman recognize and realize equality, social and political progress here or anywhere is not possible. Until these two members are equal in strength, the oneness of humanity cannot be established, and the happiness and felicity of mankind will not be a reality. These are the fundamental principles of the faith of Baha'u'llah. He said that his revelation had upset the equilibrium of the world and started to create a new balance. He said with respect to this principle that this is the age of the ascendancy of feminine attributes, that the age of the domination of the world by force and aggression had come to an end. And now we are seeing the age of the ascent of feminine attributes. If we take a cursory glance at the 20th century struggle for full partnership, if we look around and survey some of the studies that have been done on this issue, we find that we have moved very far in some respects and not very far in some others. Recent studies indicate, for example, that women asked about the progress toward the full equality of men and women say that essentially there has been too little change at too high a cost. But if you survey men on the same question, they say that the rate of change has been adequate. It's been very good, in fact, and the cost has been reasonable. After all, men conclude, don't women know that it's hard to make progress in the world? That's why it's been reserved as the province of men for so long. What begins to emerge as we look at the data from the surveys and the studies that have been done on these subjects is that there is no agreement between men and women about the problems that we confront. When we ask women how they proceed, the studies conclude that women have to do 2 and 3 jobs. Because if they enter into the workplace and start a job or a career or take on additional responsibilities, that's fine so long as they maintain the old responsibilities simultaneously. And men find themselves accepting of women in new roles, provided those roles don't impinge on the old and comfortable roles men have held for so long. In other words, it is fine for you to be promoted on your job, to have a promotion, to begin to submit papers or contribute in exciting and new ways. But dinner does need to be promptly served at 6. Somehow, there needs to be a consolidation of the foundation of this process of struggle toward full partnership. Because in every area we survey, we find that women bear the burden of change in the struggle toward full equality. Men have learned some of the buzzwords of the women's movement. We've learned to talk the talk, but we have not yet learned to walk the walk. It is interesting to note that studies of the most successful men in the United States have evidenced some very interesting observations about their condition, because we find that men themselves are in a state of great change. A recent study done by Jan Halper, a woman clinical psychologist, called Quiet Desperation: The Truth About Successful Men, drew some conclusions about 5,000 successful men she studied. And she said that there is a sense of quiet desperation, that men are discovering that the old formulas simply don't work anymore, that the force and aggression, the ability to give direction and have that direction obeyed, is breaking down. And they're finding themselves having invested in a way of life that is not giving the returns they expected. What's gone wrong with the equation? Men are finding, for example, that they have invested in a career, they've invested in professional success, they've given their lives, and in some cases their souls, to the advance of the company. And now, in the twilight of their careers, the company doesn't know them, and they've lost their children. They've lost their marriage. In my own practice as a business consultant, working with the chief executive officers of various companies and all levels of employment in those companies, I consistently found the happiest married executives were happy with their second wives, having exhausted their first marriages, climbing the ladder to the top. There's something wrong with that formula. And what men are beginning to recognize is a quiet desperation. Having invested so much in professional success, they're finding themselves empty, restless, questioning the wisdom of their choices, regretting the loss of contact, of closeness, of intimacy. As one man stated, as the chief executive officer of my company, I can travel with my wife whenever I want, but I don't know her. 44 years we've been married, and she's just a person I share my life with. I don't know her. Our intimacy waned so long ago. This is just one stratum of our society, the elite stratum. These are the people who know how to play the game. These are the people who know how to succeed. But when we look at that level of life and we find a quiet desperation, we find a struggle to find new answers, to begin to ask new questions, we see that among those who society defines as the best and most productive among us, there is a quiet admission that the formulas they have employed have been exhausted in their potency. They simply have not the effect that they desire. In the Baha'i experience, we find some interesting parallels with the society at large. On one hand, the involvement of women in leadership roles in the Baha'i faith stands in sharp contrast with that of our society, the American society, and with most societies around the world. For example, when we look around at the participation of women in leadership roles in the Baha'i faith, as members of spiritual assemblies, the governing bodies of local and national communities, as members of the appointed institutions of the Baha'i faith, we find that in those areas where women are still regarded as livestock, in those parts of the world where the status of women is not even an issue open for discussion, women in leadership in the Baha'i community averages about 20% to about just under 30%. In the United States and in Western countries, it reaches a high of about 43%. But in all of those areas, the struggle to achieve participation in the governance of the Baha'i community and in the determination of how our children are educated, how the policies which govern our communities are shaped, we find that this struggle is very intense and is always a kind of cultural revolution, because the men in the Baha'i community have not been Baha'is for generations and generations. They are the products of their culture, and we struggle with the issue of releasing that which we know best, the results of our cultural orientations. I met a woman at the International Convention of the Baha'i Faith in Haifa last year. She was a woman from a country where women do not have the right to be involved in religion. And religion is regarded as the province of men solely. In her area, in Africa, the Baha'i men taught their wives the Baha'i faith. But the habit of non-involvement was so deeply ingrained in the women of that area that despite their acceptance of the teachings of Baha'u'llah, they did not feel free to participate in the meetings. Over a very long period of time, they gradually left the campfires in their villages. They would sit around and have social discussion while the men went to Baha'i meetings. They would wait for them to return and then be informed about the proceedings of the meetings. Gradually, over a long period of time, they began to come a little closer to the buildings in which the meetings were held and sit around the open windows and kind of peek in at the windows to hear the proceedings. Imagine the step that was taken the first night a woman crossed the threshold of the building in which the meeting was held and just stood at the back of the wall. The significance of that move as an act of cultural revolution in her small area, in her small village, and then took a seat and gradually moved up from one row to the next, until that woman, in spirit or in fact, was the woman I met at the International Convention, a member of the National Spiritual Assembly of that country, educated with degrees, herself a business consultant, traveling internationally. And while she recognized and appreciated this process of social and spiritual evolution, which had led to the acceptance of the participation of women on the highest body in the Baha'i faith in that country, she still had to cope with the struggle of being heard on her spiritual assembly by men less educated and less accomplished than herself. This is a struggle which is universal. In America, where the participation of women is very high, we still fight the battle of hearing one another, of understanding the differences in our perspectives, of shifting our methods of operation from competition to cooperation and collaboration, from direction to consultation. This is a struggle which is universal to us all. However, it would be a disservice to the struggle and the experience of Baha'is here and in other places not to say that the rate of change in the Baha'i community has been very great. Anyone even casually familiar with the history of the Baha'i faith knows that the role of women in the history of the Baha'i faith has been extremely bold and extremely audacious, and has resulted in significant advances in the growth and the development of the Baha'i international community. And this has proceeded at the expense of that old model of male domination. In some senses, we Baha'i men have been dragged along kicking and screaming, but we are the better for it. And so we have an agenda set forward by the prophet we follow, by Baha'u'llah himself. And our agenda is that we as men must become champions of the equality and full partnership of women. That it is not enough for us to be passive participants, because in this age, where the struggle to compensate for inequality is being waged so fiercely by half of the population, to fail to lend a hand is an act of oppression. To sit passively by and not make every effort to open our hearts and open our ears, open our minds to new possibilities, to new ideas, to new voices, to new feelings, is tantamount to an act of violence, in that it holds back the progress and shuts off the participation of one half of our community. This is the battle we wage. The agenda we have is nothing less than a cultural revolution, a revolution of our expectations about the role of women, a revolution of the patterns of our thought about women, a revolution of our language, the way that we describe participation, the way that we describe women, the way that we think about them, the way that we behave toward them. Again, from the Baha'i writings, Abdu'l-Baha writes that woman is indeed of the greater importance to the race. She has the greater burden and the greater work. Look at the vegetable and animal worlds. The palm which carries the fruit is the tree most prized by the date grower. The Arab knows that for a long journey, the mare has the longest wind. For her greater strength and fierceness, the lioness is the more feared by the hunter than the lion. The woman has greater moral courage than the man. She has also special gifts which enable her to govern in moments of danger and crisis. There is a set of expectations that we must change about the participation of women and about the struggle for full partnership. One of the obstacles to the woman's movement is the lack of involvement of men in that movement, and the lack of the perception among men that there is anything to be gained through involvement, that there is any benefit to accrue to them. This we must discard. This ignorance and this blindness we must do away with, because there has to be mutual effort in order for this equality to be established. I'd like to conclude with two thoughts from the Baha'i writings, which speak to the ultimate aim of these teachings, the ultimate aim of their effect on the world, and which put into perspective the struggle that we have undergone over the years and centuries that precede us today. The Baha'i writings proclaim confidently that the prejudice, the war, the exploitation that has been an expression of the immature stages of a vast historical process is a part of the turbulent adolescence of humankind. It is a part of our collective coming of age. And it should not be a reason for us to despair. We should have confidence that this age of the consummation of human evolution, this age of fulfillment, will bear its fruit, will hit its mark. Our struggle should be seen as a part of the stupendous enterprise of building a peaceful world. This is why the Baha'i writings confidently proclaim, so it will come to pass that when women participate fully and equally in the affairs of the world, when they enter confidently and capably the arenas of law and politics, war will cease. Godspeed to the ascent of this principle. Let us dedicate our efforts this weekend to the furtherance of our understandings of all of the ways in which we can advance this struggle, the ways in which we can re-examine our personal cultures, the way we think, the way we talk, the way we behave toward one another. Let us struggle to open our minds and our hearts to new possibilities, to hear new questions, to explore new alternatives. In this way, our conference this weekend will be productive of more than simply expanded intellectual understanding. It will be productive of change in our lives that will lead to true happiness and true fulfillment, which can only be achieved in the context of full partnership. Thank you.